Hello, welcome all to this session, Forest, Trees and Agroforestry, from a decade of research to a decade of impacts. I am Vincent Gietz, the director of the CGIAR research program on forest, trees and agroforestry. And FTA this year is wrapping up a decade of research from 2011 to 2021 and looking into the future. And we are preparing highlights of the research that was conducted these last 10 years and also assessing impacts on the ground. And at the same time, we're also looking forward. So this session will be about that, looking at two moments, showcase some emblematic examples from a decade of research under the FTA program that some excellent FTA scientists will present to you today. And then have a discussion between stakeholders, partners at national and international level on the role they see for research to help everybody achieve their own objectives. But first, let me give the floor to Robert Nazy, the Managing Director of C4Aircraft, who was also the first director of FTA. So Robert, through video today, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all who are watching this webinar and this session of the Global Landscape Forum on the highlights of 10 years of forest, trees and agroforestry program. It is a great pleasure to welcome you and to have you attend this webinar where we present the highlight in terms of research output, outcome and impact of 10 years of the collaborative research program on forest, trees and agroforestry. And when we started the program in 2011, it was really a new venture and it became the largest integrated program on the issue on forests, trees and agroforestry. And for 10 years, hundreds of scientists have invested a lot of their time, and we have invested about $900 million over 10 years in terms of research on this very important topic. And the actuality in the COP26 in Glasgow can prove very easily the importance of forests and trees. If you have seen the latest declaration that was signed by more than 100 countries. And in FTA, we are very proud and pleased to present the highlights of our work for over 10 years and show the impact of proper plan and delivered research can have on the management of forest, trees and agroforestry in order for them to contribute to climate change and to livelihood and to saving biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you virtually, Robert. I know you'll be joining physically quite soon. You're just traveling right now. So thanks for sending this video. And now let us dig into a snapshot of the highlights of FTA that FTA is going to release in the coming days and weeks. And what we would like to see today is to present some of the chapters of these highlights that point to solutions, innovations coming from research that are ready for upscaling, especially in relation to the climate agenda. So there'll be 16 different highlights. Today, we're only showing 6 of them, also because they have a particular relation with climate change, from genes to genetic resources to policies. So let us start with Ramni Jamnadas, lead scientist at C4Aircraft. The floor is yours, Ramni.
Yes, hello everyone. We all know there is a rising enthusiasm around the world for tree planting, leading to a cascade of ambitious planting initiatives. Adding to this, we are delighted that COP26 Climate Summit's first major deal is where 100 world leaders have promised to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. So more tree planting, fantastic. Among experts, there are concerns, however, about the massive scale and speed at which tree planting is being scaled without many important considerations. Just to mention a few, there are poorly designed projects Some implementers have limited skill and knowledge in the science and application of tree genetic resources and forestry. There is little or no indication of species planted, and sometimes a large number of invasive species are planted. Exotic species are being promoted with low diversity monoculture tree planting of one favored over diverse portfolios. There is a glaring bottleneck. There is just not enough diverse tree seeds, and there is a lack of investment in developing quality of seeds. The current situation is that growers often end up planting whatever tree seeds and seedlings they can find, regardless of how suboptimal these materials may be. So remember, garbage in, garbage out. Over the last decade of FTA, we have sought to address twin concerns. Firstly, how to ensure the right tree species is planted at the right place for the right purpose, our mantra. And secondly, the availability of quality tree seed planting materials. FTA looked to improve the availability of quality tree planting materials through systematic knowledge-based approaches. PATSPO, provision of adequate tree seed portfolios in Ethiopia, is our flagship project and represents a model tree seed systems approach. It is a program that has been mainstreamed by the Ethiopian government, and it really shows how an integrated tree seed system should be developed. Please do visit PATSPO website. To highlight, forestry, agroforestry, and forest landscape farmers, scientists, and development institutions need to use useful information and tools to find the right tree for the right place for the right purpose. The next few slides very quickly slim through FTA researchers' combined years of in-depth knowledge and a vast collection of research, which is easily accessible technology to create a global tree knowledge platform. The Global Tree Knowledge Platform is one of the 50 innovations of the CGIAR's 50 long years of existence. This knowledge platform comprises a wide range of interlinked databases, maps, our open source software packages, guidelines, and other decision support tools, which guide the planting and survival of trees. Range of environment has been accessed by millions of people since its time of establishment. In addition to that, we have Global Tree Knowledge Platform, which have been developed by collaborating partners in our flagship, among them Diversity for Restoration, CDID, etc. In an upcoming publication, Flagship 1 through ex-ante analysis has shown that even a very modest investment to improve the quality of seed and seedlings will have significant quantifiable livelihood and environmental benefits. Before coming to the concluding slide, I do have applied to make for C4 eCrafts and partners field gene banks, where we have a live collection of 200 tree species already in the ground, 34 field gene banks belonging to 17 countries, mostly Africa, now threatened due to shortfall of funds to conserve them due to the change in structure of the CGIAR. If anyone is interested, if investors out there listening to us who want to adopt and support our gene banks, reach out to us. These trees are already planted, so all you need is reach out to us. My concluding message is to donors and investors, integrated tree seed systems is an absolute essential step for the planting of trees. It requires long-term investments. A mighty tree starts from a seed. So remember, garbage in, garbage out. Secondly, all those who want to plant trees, and to your investors, work with experts at the project design stage, not when you have started already, as there is a solid knowledge and science behind this undertaking. And lastly, to the tree seed system experts, you should and must scale out your existing amazing experience and knowledge to the burgeoning tree planters out there. And thank you so very much for your excellent work.
Thank you, Ramli, and thank you, Ramli. And I forgot to mention that you were the leader of the flagship one in FTA, and you've put on screen all your colleagues that were with you in this work. Okay, garbage in, garbage out, but quality in, quality out, and it all starts with genetic resources. Let me now give the virtual floor to Eduardo Somariba from Cartier, who will present on going to a next level, the important roles of trees on farms and in farming systems, which would also be an upcoming chapter of our highlights. So if the tech team could put up the video of Eduardo.
Very brief presentation. I will show you how live fences and the use of trees and live fences is becoming mainstream in Honduras. The full description of how we did it, you can find in our chapter on trees on farm in the highlights book of FTA. I will start by saying that the trees on farm are very common. They are abundant in all agricultural scenarios, are very useful, but they are invisible. They are not in the legislation, they are not in the education system, most times they are not involved in the policies. Because of this, farmers, land use planners, and policymakers do not realize the full potential of trees on farm for livelihoods and for the environment. In this presentation, we will show you one example of how to overcome this limitation by visiting what we have done with live fences in cattle ranches in Honduras. Live fences are very common in cattle ranches in Honduras. In a typical scenario like this one on the screen, you see live fences in the valleys, live fences in the hills, but also dead post fences. And there is always this possibility of transforming dead post fences into live fences and to be able to reap all the full benefits of the trees in the farming system. In Honduras, there are 3 million hectares of land under cattle ranches. This is pastures. And in these 3 million hectares, the use of live fences and all kind of fencing, like dead post fencing, is also commonplace because fencing is critical for rotational grazing, which is one of the key measures to secure high productivity and high financial returns in the production system. So fencing is key to rotational grazing, and live fences are also a common feature in this fencing strategy because they are cheaper to establish and to maintain as compared to dead post fencing, and also because they produce more posts for fencing. They are able to produce fodder, firewood, fruits, and even timber. But when you analyze the live fences in any particular country, you realize that they are suboptimal in design and management, and there is a great opportunity to improve the productivity. This is just one view of one of the quadrats for research that we established in the Catacama landscape in Honduras. We surveyed 25,000 hectares divided in 5 quadrats of 5 kilometers for 5 kilometers each. This is what you see, a lot of fences. The land is divided, and the more divided the land, the more fences you have. This is a summary of the data. You can see here that in these 25,000 hectares, we recorded 1,730 kilometers of live fences with a total cover of about 6%. And when you look at the linear density, which is a measure of how many live fences you have per hectare, in total will be about 69 meters per hectare. Of that 69 meters, 43 meters will be live fences, and about 40% of all the fencing in this landscape is dead post fence. So there is a great opportunity to change the presence of trees on the farms. One important data to keep in mind is that if you are thinking about timber, 1 kilometer of live fences will give you the equivalent to 1 hectare of block timber plantation. In Catacama, Honduras, we devised a pathway that has three routes. One is to increase the visibility of the trees on farm. Second, insert the trees on farm evidence into the national reporting system. Also insert trees on farm improvements into the development process and scale out this innovation to other areas. There is this graph that shows that the process is not simple. In every one of these pathways, there are a number of factors involved, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done with facilitation and communication to convince different actors to incorporate and mainstream the use of light fences and trees in the light fences into the production system. In conclusion, we can say that it is possible to introduce innovation, but you need solid science and good knowledge-based information to convince farmers, land use planners, and policymakers. You need a lot of communication and facilitation on key institutions and key personnel to make the changes that are necessary. You need to show that there are good financial performance of the innovation that you are posing, and also good timing and good luck are also essential. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Eduardo from Cartier, for bringing us this recipe for success with trees on farms for farmers and communities. And without further ado, let me give the floor to Christopher Marcius from C4 Aircraft. And Christopher Marcius leads the climate change flagship of FTA, and we'll talk about REDD+, which is one of the chapters that will be released very soon. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vincent. It's my pleasure really to introduce you to this to the results of this chapter on fighting climate change with forest science, written together with my colleague Amy Duchel, who's been in the study for a decade, so a decade of research and a decade of impact, but she has recently moved to FAO. In the next slide, you see the background for all this. There is the global comparative study of REDD+ has started in 2009. So we're looking at 12, almost 13 years of research, and this research has been done in comparative ways in up to 22 countries, with the intent of providing evidence-based. Can we have the next slide, please? Of providing evidence-based knowledge and tools, so science-based knowledge and tools that would allow country partners to develop efficient, effective, and equitable REDD+ policies and practices in their country. So we provide the knowledge, they have to do all the rest. And of course, the question is, how can you generate impact in this approach? And we looked at several studies that have been assessing the program over the years, starting with an FDA assessment in 2014 up to one that was done last year. And so we have quite a basis of information to look at. Please, next slide. And also we did our own, we developed our own stories of change, as we call them. This assessment is not an analysis of REDD+. We have a lot of work on this. We have over 1,000 papers developed in this decade. This is analysis how our global comparative study has contributed to REDD knowledge, influenced REDD policy and practice, and also the more general practice of forest protection, and provided learning not only to REDD+ project, but maybe also for other activities in climate change and development. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take you right to the results of this. So of course, we have been working in 22 countries, but we had also a lot of global influence into the REDD+ project. And this refers to having a role in how larger players like UNFCCC, UN REDD, the European Commission, the Governors Climate and Forest Task Force, or UNDP, and the Green Climate Fund develop their work on and around REDD+. So, for example, developing a stepwise approach for monitoring, contributing to IPCC reports and guidelines, working on tenure, on transparency of monitoring, on gender transformative approaches, on finance, and so on. And so all these, each of these lines on this slide is actually supported by a lot of impact research, trying to tie what we did to how the countries, how the international actors moved forward with their work. Next slide, please. We had also a number of case studies in the countries, as I said before, and I'm just going to give you an example of Indonesia, where we started early in 2004, 2005, already working on the red readiness in the country by providing historical deforestation data and emissions data, and basically helping Indonesia developing their approach to a REDD+. In the beginning, Indonesia thought they could be achieving their emission reductions goals only with restoration. And it was clear from the data that this was not possible, so the policy was changed. Later, we got involved in developing the INCAS, the National Carbon Accounting System. That was not the final choice for the forest reference level system that Indonesia developed, but the dialogue and engagement continued and ended in the last 2 years in support, or 3 years, to the Indonesia's peatland restoration agency, and contributing to the national forest reference levels and to the MRV system. So all this is again very carefully documented, and we have a few other of those case studies. And so this really shows how a science program can work together hand in hand with the country partners in developing a more efficient and effective policy on the ground. Next slide. Just to summarize, the elements of success of such a program are manifold, but there is a role for global influencers, individuals who have good connections to their partners on the ground. There is, of course, the importance of partnerships and on-the-ground presence. We know that where we were in countries, we had a higher influence than where we were not. We also needed to have a lot of agility to respond to changing priorities, changing policies, and so on. And we are thankful to our donors that they allowed for this flexibility. And the communication we adapted to different audiences in different languages, and we got rid of the science jargon as much as we could, and so on. We also needed to recognize that change needs time. Very often projects of 3-year duration, they have a lot of impact expectations, and basically in a 10-year program, you start seeing the results, but it takes a lot of time to effectivate this change in these really complex policy environments. And at the end, also cost efficiency is important. This whole program cost much less than 2% of the whole global investments into REDD+. And we think we could demonstrate already that we had impact with this on the national and international policies. And with this, I want to close. Just the next slide for those that look later at the presentation. You'll have here all the sources for the reports and for the assessments, and also the resource to the report that is just published, has been just published yesterday. Thanks a lot. And
wonderful. Yes, wonderful, Christopher, and all the teams, the big numerous teams behind this work, and a wonderful example on how this issue cycle research can at the same time influence the agenda, but also need to be very responsive to policy issue and fully positioned to answer demand. And I think in Glasgow, it's still this issue is still going on right now as we speak, with a fundamental role from the research community to guide action moving forward. The next speaker, we are a bit behind schedule, but we hope we can manage that in the second part of the session. Is Bas Luhmann from the FTA partner Tropenbos International will tell us about our work on finance and investment. The floor is yours.
Hi, Vincent. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon and evening. I will be talking on the volume on sustainable value chains, finance and investment in forestry and tree commodities, also on behalf of Michael Brady, Andrew Wardell, and several of our principal researchers. In this volume, we showed that in our research, we found that scaling solutions create new challenges. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Since 2011, FTA has contributed to development and on certification systems and sustainability standards for several commodities at scale. by looking at case studies and evaluating the impact of specific measures. While initiatives helped improve the different systems, follow-up studies show that despite the positive results of the systems and standards, certification imposes restrictions that many smallholders cannot meet. Sustainable and inclusive value chains may be inclusive, but smallholder farmers with little resources cannot benefit equally as those that do have resources, and actually may not benefit at all. At the same time, investors influence the direction of changes, and the criteria for scale, profit, and risk may make the balance of investments still move towards one-size-fits-all investments, which do not really meet reality on the ground for many smallholders, SMEs, or sometimes the environment. Next slide, please. So the next logical step for FTA was to start searching for inclusive scaling, seeking investments that allow for scale and at the same time adaptation to local conditions. FTA has above all contributed to policy dialogue through new, neutral, and credible knowledge, often continuing providing evidence from specific case studies. This helped, for example, to increase the understanding of the role of smallholder producers in value chains and how their participation can be facilitated through, for example, increasing financial literacy, business organization, market orientation, technical assistance, locally appropriate financial products. Some of these cases have recently been published as empirical reports, for example, about cocoa in Ghana, restoration in Uganda, or women-oriented investments in Indonesia, while the lessons of others were summarized and published as scientific articles. All of these are referred to in the volume, in this particular volume. It also increased the understanding of the role of gender in specific value chains, and there I want to mention particularly work on shea, oil palm, and cacao, and increased understanding of the importance of multi-level governance to ensure that international value chains and finance contribute to sustainable landscapes. Next slide, please. This work has led to support policy dialogues, both governmental and private. Yeah, some examples are in the context of FLAG, where FTA looked at alternative ways of dealing with national wood markets, which were not well considered in original voluntary partnership agreements. In relation to FSC, FTA did several impact studies on certification. They looked at the quality of assessments and alternative standards for small forest enterprise and communities, and versus able to promote changes in the FSC standards. And in relation to the roundtable on sustainable palm oil, yeah, that roundtable learned from our impact studies, particularly on gender and peatland, to improve its performance. In the context of finance, which is a topic that only recently emerged with FTA, research has focused on gathering evidence to prepare the evidence-based participation in policy dialogues. Next slide, please. Although case studies really help to inform processes, more work is needed on co-design and delivery evidence-based solutions that address supply chain and investment constraints. But for that, we need more research as a process rather than as a product-oriented product. And it should be in response to and engaging with a broader array of multi-stakeholder platforms at different levels if it aims to contribute to greater inclusiveness and long-term environmental protection. And we propose that it requires a system approach, linking landscapes to value chains and not looking just at landscapes or value chains, yeah, and also not working in disciplinary silos. So this all is discussed in more detail in the volume, and I recommend that you look at the volume. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bas. And yes, we will be sharing on our website and I guess to the GLF the links to this volume and this area of research and action of finance, landscape finance has been increasingly growing through time, and it's certainly a priority going forward as multiple actors need to work together in landscape and across value chains for multiple objectives. And I see there are already questions in the chat around these issues as well. And the next speaker is Marlene Elias from the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SIAT, who was our gender coordinator, is our gender coordinator in FTA. And she's talking in video today. about the gender work in FTA that has been quite instrumental and also pioneering across the CGIAR. Marlene, the floor is yours.
I'm the gender lead at the Alliance of Biodiversity International in SIAT, and I've had the pleasure of coordinating gender integration and gender research in the CGIAR research program on forests, trees, and agroforestry over the past few years. I've been working with a wonderful gender team, and we recently pulled together highlights of a decade of gender integration and research in FTA, which includes a focus on strategies for embedding gender in a research program, as well as methodological advances, empirical evidence on gender and social inclusion, and tested innovations and approaches to enhance gender equity in forest and agroforestry landscapes. We also looked at outcomes of these efforts across scales, so from the ground up to the policy level over the past decade. And some of the work that we've done recently has focused on accelerating synergies among gender equality and climate, biodiversity, and land degradation and neutrality goals. And what we've shown is that not only can gender inequalities hinder efforts to achieve positive environmental outcomes, but also that policies and interventions that focus on the environment can actually enhance gender equality. So the paper you see here has been the fruit of those efforts, and it examines different land-based approaches to promoting these kinds of synergies. So as we show in the highlights, gender work within FTA recognizes the formal barriers, so the policies, the programmatic barriers, but also the informal institutions, so the norms, the customary systems that limit rural women's access to resources, to assets, to income, and to decision-making authority. So the innovations that we pilot and that we propose aim to lift the barriers, both formal and informal, in forest and agroforestry landscapes. So for example, an important body of work that FTA has done has looked at the gender impacts of REDD+, and this includes a long-term comparative study that looked at 62 villages participating in REDD+ initiatives in 6 countries, and that showed that women were consistently excluded from REDD+ decision-making at various scales, with fewer benefits accruing to women than to men, with a drop in women's subjective well-being in REDD+ villages over time, and all of this decreased their willingness and their interest in participating in REDD+ initiatives. So FTA has helped identify elements of successful strategies and conditions under which these work for enhancing women's full and effective participation in climate action, including in REDD+ processes. So in addition to gender responsive policies, we've looked at climate finance and the role that it can play in advancing gender equality through performance-based budgeting. We've looked at the role that securing rights to land and to resources can have for incentivizing and enabling more sustainable land management decisions, for increasing the diversity of species growing on those lands, and also the link between secure land rights and women's empowerment, so showing a positive link between the two. At a finer level, FTA research has shown the need to engage local women across the entire life cycle of a REDD+ or a climate initiative to make relevant design and implementation decisions, to integrate their knowledge and their priorities and initiatives. We've looked at gender quotas, which can help, but also the fact that they can't work alone for enhancing women's participation and the quality of their participation. There's really a need to adopt various tactics to do this, including strengthening the women's capacities to participate, having in-country mentors, in some cases having women-only groups, as well as mixed groups implementing REDD+ to enhance women's active participation, the importance of carefully monitoring and reporting on women's participation rates and the quality of that participation. And to be effective, these measures really have to be accompanied by efforts to deliberately challenge the norms that maintain gender equalities. So FTA has worked on a set of approaches called gender transformative approaches, which can offer a way forward. These essentially dialogues and collaborations among local women and men that reflect and challenge discriminatory norms, working also with local opinion leaders to unlock women's effective participation. So to sum up, research has shown the need to adopt multiple complementary strategies to address formal and informal barriers to gender equality, as well as climate, biodiversity, and sustainable land management or land degradation neutrality goals hand in hand. And we show that this has to be a collaborative undertaking with different types of actors from different sectors, all genders working together. And I invite you to have a look at the documents we've highlighted here for more detailed findings and information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marlene, and all the gender teams from the various partners of FTA. It was really a mainstreaming approach, trying to embed gender issues and expand the research in different dimensions with consideration that, in fact, make the success of research and our proposal. And last but not least, I will give the floor to Manuel Gualeguata, who is joining in today very early for him, thanks to him, from Lima, Peru, to talk about restoration. In fact, restoration, last but not least, is the emblematic, holistic issue and themes where you need to combine all of the above we've just heard and more in order to tackle the problem and leverage the opportunities. Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vincent, and hello, everyone. I'll be presenting a very short overview of the key highlights that came out from the synthesis of FLR, Forest and Landscape Restoration, in the context of FTA. Let me allow to say that my name is on the first slide, but the synthesis was nurtured and came to fruition by the participation of 33 other co-authors. So we shared, an immense and contributed to an immense amount of knowledge that you will be seeing in a very, very summarized manner. Next slide, please. So in essence, forest and landscape restoration is, so to speak, a landscape approach that is not only focused on enhancing tree cover or planting trees, but optimizing landscape functions. And what you see here is the emblematic forest transition curve that what it means for the purposes of these synthesis or presentation is that FTA worked along that curve from the very left side on conservation of native habitat to through secondary and agroforestry, annual crops, grasslands, agricultural systems, and commercial plantations or also plantations for protection purposes. So these multidimensionality makes it challenging, but on the other hand, it was really, really interesting to see the amount of knowledge that came out, basically because FTA was born at the time that the Bond Challenge was born. And the Bond Challenge, it relies, or at least uses, applies FLR as an emblematic approach to optimize, as I said, landscape functions from an environmental, livelihood, and social dimension. Next slide, please. So basically, the synthesis is divided among five major areas that overlap a little bit. So a lot of work was put out to contribute to science aspects. Previous slide, please. Yes, and we produced a lot of information on water, tree, forest interactions, making operational links between climate change, adaptation, and mitigation in a landscape or FLR context, and innovative approaches such as the land degradation surveillance framework that aims to diagnose land and soil health across landscape. Next slide, please. Contributions to global narrative and discourses, and again, this is a very, very short summary of what you will see in the publication. Conceptual monitoring and assessment frameworks, good practice principles were developed and adopted by national and international bodies. Guidance and scholarly synthesis on FLR and gender, the previous presentation focused on gender, but there were very specific outputs that linked gender and FLR. Clarifying the L in FLR, that means clarifying how landscape approaches can be implemented, what are the key bottlenecks in terms of design, implementation, and monitoring. Next slide, please. Contributions to policy and governance. And there are three key outputs here: assessments on design and implementation gaps in FLR initiatives, national programs and projects. That was done on a global level in selected countries. Policy and legal levers to promote natural forest regrowth for multiple benefits. That is going a little bit beyond tree planting and looking at assisted natural regeneration or passive natural regeneration, which is becoming a very important land use type in a FLR context. And again, scholarly synthesis on FLR governance. These came out as two special issues in two international journals that came out probably 2-3 years ago. Next slide, please. Focusing on actors on the ground, and this is perhaps the bread and butter of FLR is that you really need to work on with different stakeholders and that have different aspirations and goals. FTA carried out a few capacity needs assessment in an FLR context. Multi-stakeholder dialogue frameworks for intersectoral and interinstitutional integration were put out and created, as well as participatory monitoring frameworks and citizen science approaches. It's probably one of the key highlights of the FTA work on FLR has been really to work at the ground level, from the bottom up. Next slide, please. And just to conclude, what you see on the left is the geographic distribution of the many different outputs that FTA put in the context of FLR, field-based FLR reports, country surveys, synthetic reports, global synthesis reports as well. And just what you see on the right, it's perhaps the way that FTA has really worked. And I reiterate the fact that we've worked from the top down and the bottom up, and we've influenced the CBD, we've influenced the UNCCD in the context of many of our products. The upcoming decade on ecosystem restoration has nurtured a lot from these decade of FTA outputs in an FLR context, as well as regional commitments such as Initiative 2020 in Latin America, AFR 100. And so the collaboration keeps going on. We are a UN ecosystem restoration partner, and all the outputs that hopefully you will be able to look at in detail in the book will keep having impact and providing essential information for what is the next decade to come in a ecosystem restoration context. Next slide, please. So I thank you for your attention. And what you see on the left is the publication that I invite you to look at and react. And comments welcome. And I thank you again for your attention.
Oh, thank you, Manuel, for this very clear presentation. A key area of work of FTA that you've developed and that you've led in the past, leading to a sort of also people-centered approach to restoration that makes a little bit of or different as well from some other complementary approaches, and the participatory frameworks that are so important. And before we come to, and I will give the floor to Peter Minang for exactly looking at how research needs to be participative with actors when we look at a decade of action going forward, a new way of doing research. The question I would like to ask now the audience or esteemed public joining maybe live in Glasgow or online is exactly about going forward the role of trees and forests. We've seen the considerable role they could play in different parts of the Sustainable Development Agenda, but if we look forward between the following objectives that will probably appear in the polling on the screen, which one seems to you the most important, where we need to enhance the contribution of forests and trees? And there are 5 options to select. I'm not seeing the polling, Fabio, so I'm not sure if
all is live.
Is live. So
To access the poll, people need to click on the interactivity tab on the InWin platform.
Wonderful interactivity, and look at the poll. So where should we put more effort? Climate change action, biodiversity, conservation, sustainable food systems, bioeconomy, and or social inclusion. There is just one choice, doesn't mean the four that are not important, but if there were one to pick to do more, showing the role of forests and trees, what would it be? We can give maybe 30 seconds for everybody in the audience to cast a choice. And then, in fact, I will hand over the floor to Peter Minang, who will moderate and lead the discussion with our esteemed panel today. Fabio, I'll let you tell us when the poll is closed.
Yes, we're going to give it another 10 seconds. So please make your choice. And we're going to display the results. We
will see the results right now.
Yeah, in 15 seconds. So, okay, we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're closing it now. So I'm asking my colleagues to send me the results, and we're going to display the results in a second. Thank you very much.
Okay, so this is just to also give a bit the opportunity for the audience to input. Of course, there is also a chat function where, which time permitting, we can see in the next session if some questions can be picked.
Okay, allow me to share my screen. So here's the results.
Okay, so well, very interesting that as well when it's quite a split, it's always interesting, but there is a bit of a marker of being sure that social inclusion, eradication of poverty gets at the forefront, and it gives me opportunity to say we've seen today 6 of the highlights. There are 10 more. In fact, there are 16 in total, and especially important one dealing with livelihoods, food security, and nutrition, and others. So hopefully that will be addressed in the highlights, but certainly a point of further emphasis going forward. Thanks to the public for this feedback. And Peter, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Vincent. Thanks, all our panelists in the first session. Welcome everyone to this second session that is going to take us through. We heard from the core research team, people doing the science within FTA. Now we want to have a discussion with a very distinguished panel that is going to look at how do we bring that research to action? How do we co-develop that research? And how do we make sure that the results actually get to where they are supposed to get to and deliver results? So we have a distinguished group of 5 people today, and I'm going to introduce them as they speak. We'll go first with what some of the main users and interactors with the research that FTA has been doing. And the first one on the list is Dr. Malanding Jaite, who is the main advisor to the Minister for Environment, Climate Change, and Natural Resources in the Gambia. Someone I know really well, and we're very pleased to welcome you, Dr. Malanding Jaite. Just your thoughts in 4 minutes. How have you benefited from this type of research from FTA? How is it helping with action on the ground, and what are how would you like to see it, Dr. Jaite, evolving?
Peter, thank you very much. And I would say thanks to everyone for organizing this forum. And on behalf of Team EBA Gambia, I would really say thank you. Definitely, as I follow the discussions, I realize that we are not alone in this issue of how do we really restore trees and forests. EBA project, Peter knows, but some of us who are on who don't know, the Gambia has a large landscape ecosystem-based adaptation project that we've been running with ICRAF, or World Agroforestry Center, for the last 4 years, thanks to their science, because they have been the main technical support in terms of really making sure that a good baseline study is done. We understand what's on the ground, as well as help us define ways as to what's the best approach in getting some of our landscapes restored. EBA's goal is really to restore at least 12 to 15,000 hectares of degraded forest and agricultural landscapes, as well as mangroves. And then, of course, in order to address this issue, especially what the poll just showed, in that much of what we are trying to do is to bring up livelihood systems too. So we have within the project the idea that we can promote the development of natural resource-based enterprises. And in that regard, we are looking very keenly as to what type of trees, either timber or non-timber tree products, that can be promoted in terms of either community level or individual level enterprises, as in order to really ensure that whatever restoration process we embark on is sustainable. Of course, early on, we realized that we don't have enough seeds. And the issue also of what do we go for? I mean, often the general preference is that for communities want to have fruit trees, many of which are actually exotic trees, mangoes, cashews, and orange, citrus fruits, while ecologically, there is this need to have a more resilient tree species that are primarily either the timber trees or non-fruit tree trees of our local type, many of which certainly folks are not in the culture of actually cultivating and growing. So we do have that big issue, the gap between what is ecologically feasible and perhaps desirable for restoration, and what is socioeconomically appealing and desired by the communities for restoration, given that they do address their short-term needs for food and money. Okay. And certainly one of the things that we would want to see is addressing this issue of how do we make the very slow-growing indigenous species, how do we domesticate some of them, especially for their economic value? Perhaps that will then encourage more of their cultivation and growing. So essentially, that's a big gap, as well as vegetative or even other methods of generating seedlings, given that the restoration process we are embarking on is quite large and the demand for seedlings is very limited. And of course, there aren't any mother trees that will support the seed production side too. So there is quite a lot, but I guess we are not alone in it, and certainly we would learn a lot more. Peter? Yeah, mute,
Peter, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Jaite. Really interesting points with respect to the gap. So we go to Ms. Elie Janchia from INBA. She's a scientist with INBA, and we'd like to hear from her because she's been interacting with FTA. So the real question is, Janchia, what did FTA bring to INBA since joining in 2017, and how do you see that going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very glad to be here. INBA has joined FTA since 2017, and I think FTA is one of the fantastic partnerships that INBA has. There are 3 points I want to highlight: the uniqueness of FTA partnership. First, the FTA partnership is one of the largest research programs for development focused on the forests, trees, and agroforestry in sustainable development, food security, and climate change, aided and provided funding, technical support, and a wide range of partnerships in undertaking research for development. INBA benefits from the cross-learning and sharing the expertise from the different partners, like many CIFOR. I think every partner organization brings and contributes their own strengths and advantages, which makes the FTA partnership in a more comprehensive, collaborative, and diversified way to tackle the complicated and changing world. And it also facilitates a more efficient knowledge exchanging platform and networks between the scientific communities and for scaling up visibility, such as we have the scientific conference last year and this year. Secondly, the FTA partnership resulted in generation of evidence-based knowledge, which was a large gap before, because we mainly focused on the implementation of projects and programs. And a total of more than 14 publications across a wide range of thematic areas were produced and published. This ranges from the planting material production, value chain development, farm and food school, site species matching, sustainable management of resources, landscape restoration, biomass and carbon assessment, climate change mitigation potential, allometric studies, bioenergy, feed and fodder, ecosystem services, among others. So these studies and publications include working papers, technical reports, journal papers, policies, or strategies and policy briefs. Last but not the least, I think FTA is gathered by a group of professionals and scientists globally who care for the nature and people and have rich experience in forestry and agroforestry. And I really appreciate that FTA encourages full engagement of the young professionals and the female scientists, and also set efforts for the capacity buildings. Because I believe youth is our future and is a key stakeholder for future. So from my bottom of heart, I do hope FTA partnership will continue post 2021. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks a lot, Jansha. Really, really cogent points there and very succinct. Thank you very much. I think let's go on to Eric Scheitzer from Embrapa. He is the chef général for Embrapa Florestas. So Embrapa is also a producer of research, and we would like to learn from you, understand from you, how do you see that co-production? How do you see this kind of research, partnership moving forward with action and results towards biodiversity climate change goals in 2030? Thank you.
Hi, Peter. First of all, I would like to thank the opportunity to be here. So this is great. Well, the first thing is that Embrapa is a large agricultural research corporation. So we do research in all areas linked to land use, and we can work with lettuce and the very big tree or the very complex forest. So it means that we are very interested in the convergence of production systems, the livelihood, how forests are integrated in life of people. The second thing is that we have 43 research centers, and they are distributed along the 0 latitudes to 42 latitudes. So we live and we research within a very, very complex environment with different problems, different people, different forests. We have been acting both in global terms, national, regional, landscape and farm level. And I think when I heard the first presentations from C4, what I thought is that, wow, their targets or their goals or their research match very much with ours. And the first point I think it's important to join FTA and be together is that we will have a voice to show our knowledge, and we will hear a voice from other countries so that we will learn with them. So the FTA can be a very good voice for us and into our programs. Well, what I was talking about, I'm starting about Embrapa, and I would say that one of the main processes we are going now is to integrate our projects into the SDG. So we are revising all our research program and looking at from the SDG point of view. And I think this is also another point to go into a partnership with C4. In terms of needs or the scenario for cooperation, we are worried with climate change, innovation along all value chain, and linkages to actors. So again, what was said is important to us. And we think we have some real challenges in terms of long-term research and short-term research, mixing that. And we do believe that with C4, we can also leverage a little bit our capacity of developing long-term research. We see that there's no future without international cooperation. We've been betting our action with institutes like C4. C4 was housed once at Embrapa in Latin America. Now it is not, but ECRAF also now and then had offices within Embrapa, and we are happy to have them here again. And we are betting also in multilateral knowledge networks such as UFRO, and we do share lots of the views that have been built along the last years by UFRO. Well, just to finish, before Peter cuts me and starts to complain about time, I made a small list of points that I think it's a first approach of ideas for future cooperation. The first thing we think we have to apply resources is technology to sustainable forest management. In the beginning of last year, I heard Dr. Guariguata speaking about the best solution to avoid deforestation, which is sustainable forest management. So this is important to us. The second thing is that we should have product development all along the value chain. We can't have forests to have non-used products. So we need new products, we need to improve our processes of the new, and we need to generate wealth from the forest. So we want to work in this new bioeconomy and in the old bioeconomy too, with forest management and timber production.
Eric, can you just wrap up? Yeah, please.
Yes,
In
it's
30 seconds.
half a minute, Peter. So the next point is energy. Forests are energy. Restoration. This is a key point for us, both economic and environmental. And when I talk about restoration, agroforestry is within that too. So, and then all social and drivers to land use change, and land use change actually in the direction of degraded areas into forestry and in terms of avoiding deforestation. And we have to work a lot in communication with society. Sometimes forests are a barrier, not a solution, or they are seen as a barrier, not as a solution. And that must change.
Thanks.
Sorry,
thanks
Peter.
a lot, Eric. Yeah, thanks. Very good point. I think so. So that's why we kept on. Thank you very much. Really good point, Eric, and good directions for the future. Now we have our last but not the least speaker, Mr. Salvatore Pinozzotto. I have known him for a bit also since the last Rubber Forum that was held in Cote d'Ivoire recently. So Salvatore is the Secretary General for the International Rubber Study Group, and really a key partner, potential, link for FTA and understanding how we work. So we'd like to hear your views about how you see FTA or these kinds of partnerships going forward in terms of action and results towards the 2030 objective. Thanks, Salvatore.
Okay, Peter, thank you so much. Actually, it was a pleasure to have you as a speaker after the World Rubber Summit in Côte d'Ivoire that you just mentioned. Well, when we speak about science and climate change, I think first I have to say in rubber we are quite fortunate that we have already a big organization that is called the International Rubber Research and Development Board, under which umbrella operates all the Rubber Research Institute in most of the natural rubber producing countries. So they do an excellent work in terms of exchange of clones. They have a very successful exchange clones program that it's running since many years already, and their goal is always to improve clones and have better plantations and better trees. But I think now there are now new priorities. Of course, climate change. We are in COP26, so climate change is today the main risk for natural rubber plantations. Already today, we are feeling the impact of climate change already in many countries, and certainly it will stay with us for a very long time. So we need really to put together all the scientific knowledge that we have. We have to also identify what are the gaps in terms of knowledge that we still have, and we have many, I have to say. And we have worked together along all the supply chain. And in this context, now we have worked very closely with the IRDB, but also with FTA very recently, since June 2020, when we decided to have this collective work on how we can adapt natural rubber plantations to climate change risks, and also identify how natural rubber plantation could mitigate climate change risks. So this is an ongoing collaboration. We need certainly, the goal of this work is also to identify some policies that could be put in place and moving in this direction. I think the involvement of governments here is very important to make something happening on the ground, because our impression is that we have some knowledge due to the studies and research activities that has been done, but also we have a gap from what we know and what is happening on the ground. So we need to transfer this knowledge on the ground, and from doing that, we need also large scale capacity building activities, because it's worth mentioning that 90% of the 14 million tons of the world natural rubber production are coming from smallholders. So someone mentions in previous presentation the difficulties that smallholders might have in implementing sustainable activities. So we need to be sure that somehow they are on board, and we move. We really have to move quickly in this direction, because the time is now. Thank you.
Thanks, Salvatore. Really good points. I think we all recognize how strongly we have to link with government. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, really excellent points that will guide us in terms of how partnerships like this will shape the work going forward. Thanks once again, and I'd like to hand over to Vincent for some closing remarks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks to all our four panelists today, noting that in the program, Dr. Benoit, who is director of the University of Kisangani in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, could not join us, but probably we will find other ways to have his inputs and views and put them on our public web. So thank you to all the panelists, also to the FTA presenters. What we see is we are at a very critical moment for renewed awareness of the climate crisis, of the biodiversity crisis. And continued awareness is so critical, because we just experienced, for instance, with the consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, that events of global magnitude is really impacting everybody, and there are lessons to be drawn from that. And I think one of the first is that it was not unexpected. Scientists have been warning about the possibility of a pandemic. Many countries had plans to fight. We should have got prepared. And this parallel with climate change, with the biodiversity crisis in the making, is very striking. So we know the risk, we need to act. And this is where 10 years of research have shown that there are big opportunities for multiple objectives. And just an example is the amount of degraded lands that could help both the productive agenda, but also the biodiversity and climate agendas. There are also lots of different contexts and different margins of maneuver that are sometimes big or sometimes narrow beyond the low-hanging fruits. There is no one size fits all, and solutions have to be locally based with ownership of local stakeholders, population. And these solutions will be knowledge intensive. So this is why FTA, and I think the discussion showed today, that there is really a need for broad partnership of multiple complementary actors around knowledge for action, partnership of complementary partners, not just research in silos. And this is where I think plea for all these partnership, FTA, to capitalize on what has worked well, the success, and to reinvent itself at the closure of a decade and at the start of a new one, a new kind of research in development partnership. And I really thank all the presenters and the speakers for having brought very good ideas on how to do that concretely. Thanks to all, and a good continuation of GLF to all our public. Over to you, Fabio, and the technical team. Thanks also to your support.
Thanks. No, it's over. Goodbye to everybody. Thanks for your time and participation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Gracias.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Muchas
Obrigado.
gracias. Muito obrigado.